ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm host Rin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. The Alternative for Germany party has become the first hard-right party to win a state election in Germany since 1945, securing a major victory in Thuringia. This breakthrough poses significant challenges to Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government and signals a potential shift in German politics. With the rise of both hard-right and hard-left sentiments, how will Germany's political landscape evolve? Joining us today on TVP World to discuss this are Piotr Andrzejewski from the Institute for Western Affairs and Andreas Umland from the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So, Mr. Umland, can you help us understand what is contributing to the success of the AfD party in this region?
First, maybe I should start with the fact that I'm myself from this region. I've grown up in Thuringia. I'm from the city of Jena, the hometown of Sarah Wagenknecht. And what is happening here, I think the main story is about coming to terms with the past. What we had in East Germany over the last several decades, both under the Soviet, de facto Soviet regime, and then also in the aftermath, is an insufficient reflection upon the Nazi past and the Soviet past of East Germany. And that's why this far-right party, which is in Thuringia led by a fascist, Björn Höcke, and the far-left party led by, one could say, a neo-Stalinist, Sarah Wagenknecht, have had so much support in these states, because people are not aware about the historical context of these parties. But there are, of course, many other factors here concerning the transformation and the feeling of disregard that many East Germans have for some reason. What may be sometimes overlooked here as well is that East Germany is an exceptionally old region in Europe, demographically old, because young people are leaving East Germany. And also East Germany is, in the European comparison, an exceptionally atheistic region. So we have churches in East Germany, but these churches are largely empty. They're there largely as buildings and not as community centers. And this creates, I would say, a part of this explosive emotions that have now led to this vote. I would not just say against democracy and against liberalism, but a vote against, you could say, modernity and the modern world by an aging population which has no which is not religiously bound.
All right, Mr. Andrzejewski, do you echo the same sentiment as we see like a lot of historical context do contribute to the electoral results? However, when we look at the European Union as a whole, there seems to be a trend that is also shifting rightward, or at least we're seeing a significant polarization. Is this a trend, or is it an isolated incident happening in Germany right now?
Definitely,
in the European context,
not an isolated incident.
Sorry.
It is a European-wide process, and I believe there will be also a spillover effect from what happened in Saxony and Thuringia on Sunday, especially looking at the closest neighbor a little bit to the south, Austria, which will hold its national election in just 3 weeks' time, and where the Freedom Party of Austria, a far-right party, a populist party, is actually polling to win it. Whether they will be in government, that's another question, also both for Saxony and Thuringia. Nevertheless, we have to see that we had European Parliament elections in May, and there was a rise in right-wing or far-right parties Europe-wide, so we can speak about the trend. However, it was not strong enough to topple the political establishment. All the other parties, the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, have enough to maintain a majority. And this is actually not the case in what happened in Thuringia and Saxony, where a coalition government will have to be formed in both cases that will have to include at least one of the anti-establishment parties. And since AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is considered to be the biggest threat, it is the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, the party of Sarah Wagenknecht that Mr. Umland named as neo-Stalinist, that was the biggest winner. And I think the sentiment is actually true, because in the montage that you showed her as the first person cheering from her victory, because she probably will have to be included, or her party will have to be included in the future coalition talks. She's the real anti-system winner, and she will try to push her agenda. Perhaps it shows that we are seeing a rise of a new type of anti-establishment parties that are more left-leaning. This is also true for Austria, where we could see the resurgence of the Communist Party of Austria as well. So we have several new developments that are not only limited to Eastern Germany, but I believe that there is a spillover effect around the region and the whole of the continent.
Right, Mr. Andrzejewski brought up a very good point here about the anti-establishment sentiment, and I think we do see that on the rise. Mr. Umland, you just mentioned earlier that there is an aging demographic that is having problem coming to terms with embracing modernity. However, when we look at the voting age and the demographic of some of the AfD voters, we do see like kind of a horseshoe with an aging demographic, and also very young first-time voters kind of being drawn in by this anti-establishment sentiment. What do you think is the contribution to that being on the rise?
The reason that I'm mentioning these demographic peculiarities here is that we don't have a similar support for these anti-systemic parties in West Germany. So this is an East German phenomenon, and in Thuringia it's most radically expressed. But in the last European parliamentary elections, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, the right-wing populist party, won basically all over East Germany. And there is this big difference to West Germany, where the Christian Democrats, the center-right, is dominating. And so I think one has to go a little bit deeper than just look at this particular phenomenon. This makes it also somewhat a less frightening phenomenon that it is an East German phenomenon than if it were an all German phenomenon, because East Germany is only a relatively smart of the part of Germany. It's about 1/5 of the population. And even if we have now this relatively strong support for the far right in East Germany, this does not yet mean that the German federal government will change in the next elections and will include, let's say, far-right party. So it is a worrying development. It is a very East German, a very post-Soviet, you could say, development. It has to be talked about and addressed, but it is not yet meaning that Germany is sort of drifting in the direction, let's say, of Hungary, or as the colleague mentioned, in the direction in which Austria may be drifting, because the relative weight of East Germany is not so high in the all German political context.
All right, so like Mr. Umland mentioned here, there's perhaps a little bit of balance of approach when it comes to discussing these matters, and whether or not this is going to have a dramatic impact on the federal level, of course, is something to be discussed. So what's your take on this, Mr. Andrzejewski? Do you think that this will eventually affect the federal level, or do you think it's still relatively contained to the region? And at what point do you think there is a cause for concern that we might see a whole shift in German politics?
Well, actually, while those anti-establishment parties might not be as significant on the federal level, there is a development that I would call the shifting of the Overton window. It's moving a little bit more to the right, and or significantly to the right. As Nietzsche said, if you stare into the void enough time, the void will start to look at you or start looking back at you. And this can be especially seen when you look at how Michael Kretschmer, which is the leader of the Christian Democrats in Saxony, who barely won over AfD with just 1% of the votes, how he communicates with the electorate of Saxony. It is a different type of communication than the CDU party does on the federal level. And he's much more shifted to the right. So while the anti-establishment parties might not be part of government on the federal level, they are already influencing a shift of tone, a shift of possible policies, and so on. So they actually have a huge influence. We've seen this process happening in Austria, where the far right is much more significant and for a longer period of time, where the Austrian People's Party has already moved much more to the right and still continues to do so. And this does not stop the far right FPU from being the strongest party right now. So I would expect this happen in Germany. People will not vote for a copy if they have the original. And I think the biggest issue is the existence of the anti-establishment electorate, because it will not disappear, and several other parties or new parties that will emerge in some time will still try to cater to this electorate. And this sentiment will not disappear. It will get stronger over time. This is what the data and political science shows us in several countries. What will change is who is perceived to be anti-establishment. If Sarah Wagenknecht enters ruling coalitions will rule for co-rule for several years. Will she be part of the establishment or not? Will there be a new left-wing party that will oppose her in the future? Quite possibly. This is how it functions, and feeding the anti-establishment electorate is one of the biggest threats, systemic threats to democracy that I see right now.
Right, both very good points here and do leave us a lot to think about. So guys, thank you so much for being with us on TVP World, Mr. Piotr Andrzejewski and Mr. Andreas Umland. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned.